Hello everyone, in this video I'll be ranking the best cloaks and capes in Baldur's Gate 3 on a tier list. Now, did you know that a lot of these don't actually work properly, with some of them actually triggering their effects on yourself when they should be triggered on the enemy? Well, we'll be breaking down all of that in this video because there's actually quite a few cloaks that don't work as they should. The first one I want to highlight is one of the apparently better ones here with the Cloak of the Weave. Now, the Absorb Elements ability here in the game is kind of broken. So this counts for the other cloak that also gets this, but I found it works even worse on the Cloak of the Weave for some reason. So it gives you a +1 bonus to spell save DC and spell attack rolls. That is really great. However, it's the Absorb Elements with the taking half elemental damage. That works properly. It gives you the 1d6 of elemental damage on your next attack. That works properly. It says once per short rest. That's actually a lie. These are per long rest. And in particular, I found that the Cloak of the Weave is only once ever. Anytime I've used this, it doesn't end up proccing it again, unlike the Cloak of Elemental Absorption, which does do it per long rest despite saying per short rest. So yeah, it's a bit misleading. I've seen a lot of other people having the same issue as well. So once you use it, like I have it on my character here, and I used it previously in the game. Now I can't actually get any extra effects out of it for some reason. So it ends up being pretty much broken. So dropping a Call Lightning there. Yeah. Saved on it, that's fine. We'll just continually keep casting this here, and you're going to see it doesn't actually do anything. Save failed, no activation. It's weird. I've long rested, nothing seems to work for my character. So yeah, there's a bit of an issue there with it. So it doesn't actually work properly to absorb that element. So yeah, I'd have to say overall that this one, it gives you a plus tier overall overall spell save DC and spell attack rolls. So that makes it decent, but it's kind of lying to you. I'm still going to put it in the B tier just because a bonus to spell save DC is great, considering some of the other cloaks on this list aren't as good. But next up is the Cindermoth Cloak, which also causes some weird issues. So the Cindermoth Cloak, what this does is, so whenever somebody attacks you within 2 meters, that enemy will receive burning. Now the weird part about it is it rolls a DC 12 dexterity check, which is not that high. But the problem with this is whenever you go to do it, it actually does the roll on your own character. So I just went with the attack there. So whenever it rolls to apply burn on the target, it's going to base it off your dexterity. So if you have a high dexterity, it's not going to end up causing that. You can see there, it caused burning on both of us here. But it rolls the dexterity check on your own character, which obviously also causes issues, especially late in the game when you want to apply this on enemies. You're going to be rolling it against your own dexterity with a DC of 12. So not very likely to land. This is probably best used on like someone that is built around their strength score, as it's not going to apply properly. It seems like it should do the dexterity check on the enemy, but no, it does it on your own character. And the other lie with this is it says any attack within 2 meters, it only counts on melee attacks. So that also doesn't work properly. So if we were to do a close range like crossbow attack, nope, it won't trigger. So yeah, this one obviously has some issues with how it works. So for that, I'd have to say, also since you get this late in Act 3, you literally get it like near the end of the game. It's similar to the C to D tier. I'm just going to put it in the D tier because yeah, it's strange. Better used on someone that doesn't have a dexterity score that's very high. But next up, we have ourselves the Cloak of the Cunning Brume here. When the wearer disengages, they create a foggy cloud within 2 meter radius that lasts for 1 turn. This is actually a pretty good one. Also, it looks cool, so style points, you got constellations there. So if we were to go ahead with a disengage here, boom, we create a little fire cloud. And this can blind people, but if you have the ability to not get blinded, this is perfect, because if you want to steal something, all you have to do is go disengage, boom, create the cloud. This is actually pretty underrated, because you can spam disengage and create these little clouds of darkness. Basically darkness, I should say. It'll blind you, but if you have something like, there's a lot of weapons and helmets in the game that'll give you the ability to see in magical dark vision, like the Steel Watcher helmet, for example. I don't have proficiency in there, but you become immune to blinded. So with something like that, you can go around in here and you can disengage in combat too as a bonus action, which is also a nice ability for rogues. But I would say the best benefit of this cloak is actually just to go around stealing. So I like to have the Gloves of Thievery, the Cat's Grace, anything that boosts up your dexterity. Throw this on, go around, steal to your heart's content. I do think the Cloak of Cunning Brume is actually kind of underrated, so I'm just highlighting its effectiveness here outside of combat, but in combat as well. I'd have to say this is probably like an A to S tier just for its out of combat uses, but even in combat, being able to create a fog cloud on disengage is great because there's a lot of ways to do bonus action versions of that if you're a rogue or a monk. So that could potentially be in an S tier choice as well, just for that alone, because that's really nice to have. But next up, we have the Cloak of Elemental Absorption. So previously mentioned here, this is something that causes some issues because that absorb elements is only per long rest, obviously causing some issues with how it's going to trigger. So boom, we got that absorb elements there. It's nice. It's actually a good ability. And again, this one actually works even if you've already, like, I've used this cloak in my playthrough. That 1d6 of elemental damage is nice. I recommend having this on like a paladin or something else that's going to be doing melee attack. Anyone really that's going to need absorb spells. It's pretty useful, although a little misleading that it says per short rest and it's actually per long rest. At the end of the day, it's still pretty good. Absorb elements is a nice reaction to have on your character, especially a melee one, to take half elemental damage. It is a little bit misleading, so with that, I'd have to say it's also a B tier choice. The fact that you can get this a little earlier in the Cloak of the Weave, it's not as good as it, obviously, with the bonuses spell save DC, and the effects do actually work after a long rest, which is nice compared to the other one. So they're both weird. I'd have to say they're B tier. But next we got ourselves a Cloak of Protection. You know the deal with the Cloak of Protection. This is one of the best cloaks in the game. Drip points, not really that beautiful to look at, with the blue and red looks ugly, but I think like the black and white dyes look good on it. The thing is, it gives you a +1 armor class and +1 to saving throws. Similar to the Ring of Protection, these are nice to have. Anyone can benefit from more saving throws or armor class so that they don't get hit by spells and melee attacks often. This one, you don't have to talk too much about it. The Cloak of Protection will benefit any team, any composition, any player in the game can benefit from that. So with that, I think it's an S tier choice just because it doesn't provide a lot. An armor class bonus is nice though, and compared to some of the others out here, it's pretty solid. And next is the Fleshmelter Cloak, which actually has, this is the first time we're getting something that actually benefits the character by not working properly. Pretty cool design there too. But the big thing is, it gives if an attacker deals melee damage, you do a 1d4 of acid damage. This actually doesn't proc on the acid gloves in the game that creates extra acid damage or acid area. So anything that procs on acid damage doesn't actually work properly with this. But the cool interaction is, if you get hit with a critical hit, that 1d4 of acid damage becomes a 2d4. So slight benefit there. If you accidentally get hit by a critical attack, you're going to be dealing extra damage to the enemy. So that's one time where that extra bonus is actually a good thing on this. So with that, the Fleshmelter Cloak, it would have to go, I would say, high B to A tier. Getting damage on the enemy is nice, and it's also found in the healing House of Healing Morik, which is pretty decent into Act 2, so you can get this relatively in the mid game. And next up is the reverse Raincloak. This is an interesting one because it makes your character dripping wet, which is not always a good thing because it makes you resistant to burning, good. It makes you resistant to fire damage, also good, but vulnerable to lightning and cold damage. Why this is an issue? Because enemy spellcasters can take advantage of that, and their Cone of Cold will pretty much one-shot you, or any other damaging spell like Lightning Bolt and things like that. So it does pose a risk. However, this is good if you have heat-based gear. Yeah, the reverse Raincloak is kind of an interesting item. I wouldn't say it's that good overall, just because applying a vulnerability to yourself is not something that we want typically, and it can negate any type of burning. So again, any heat gear will work well with this, but at the end of the day, this is just an okay one, and I would have to put it somewhere around the C tier because it makes you vulnerable, and that can mean the end of your run if you get unlucky with like a Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolt, Cone of Cold, a Yodeluk's Freezing Sphere, many different spells. So yeah, and you get it in the Circus of the Last Days late in the game as well. However, next up we have the Thunderskin Cloak. So what this item does is whenever a creature with reverberation, which is extremely easy to set up because there's things like the Boots of Stormy Clamor here, which will give you the target 2 turns of reverberation whenever you apply a condition. Conditions are extremely easy to apply in Baldur's Gate 3. The Illithid ability Drain can give you on your melee attacks. Any type of spell typically has some condition you can apply. And if you don't like that, you also have the Gloves of the Blaring Skies, which will apply reverberation on thunder, lightning, or radiant damage. So a lot of ways to apply reverberation, but this they make a Constitution saving throw, DC 14, or they become dazed. This is where it's really good because dazed is such a useful ability. It gives the target disadvantage on wisdom saves, so things like Hold Person and Command will land much more likely. In addition, it also removes their dexterity modifier from their armor class, so it gives them less AC. And a sneaky way to be able to trigger this is by proccing opportunity attacks. So you can actually make, if you apply reverberation with like Spirit Guardians and then walk away from them, make them dazed, then you can land your Hold Person and they'll have disadvantage on the save. So there's actually a lot of really sneaky ways you can take advantage of this. And I would recommend this on any character that's going to be paying or doing any type of thing with reverberation, because applying dazed is just so good for your spells. And with that, I'd have to say that the Thunder Cloak, I'd have to put that in the A tier. Being able to daze a target off an opportunity attack is pretty sneaky, but a very useful strategy. And even so, it's just good because if you end up getting hit by the attacker and you have Spirit Guardians up, they're likely going to become dazed. So useful. And for the last uncommon one, we have the Vivacious Cloak here. So you gain 8 temporary health points after casting a spell while in melee. What also works very well with this is actually the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets. So with these, the Beckoning Darkness, this is a spell that you'd cast in melee range. And whenever you cast it, you can do it per turn as a bonus action. So this will give you essentially endless amounts of 8 temporary health. So you can continually keep refreshing that with the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets here. And you can also do that if you have the Shire Spear of the Night, because the darkness will also count from it. Sorrowful Lash from the Sorrow Glaive will also trigger it. And really any spells or cantrips can also trigger that. So yeah, it's great because it does work on cantrips, even though it says spells. So this is a case of a cloak giving us another added benefit when it doesn't normally not normally supposed to do that. 8 temporary health. Health is a resource. It's good to have extra resources. And yeah, it also looks pretty nice too. So big benefit of having extra gauntlets and anything that's going to trigger this. I do think that the Vivacious Cloak is worth putting up into at least the A tier for that extra health. Again, it's a resource, and the more of it you have, the better. And next up, we got ourselves the Cloak of Displacement, which is actually pretty useful. The reason being, it's good on a spellcaster. At the beginning of the wearer's turn, the cloak activates, granting them disadvantage on attack rolls that target the wearer. And it lasts until you take damage. So disadvantage on attack rolls, obviously rolling 2 die, taking the lower result. This gives you a lot of extra survivability. This is great on a caster because they're likely to target of a lot of attacks, and giving disadvantage on attack rolls means the target's much less likely to get hit. And not only that, much likely to get hit, also much less likely to get targeted, because that's how the AI in Baldur's Gate 3 works. So this is actually a pretty useful cloak for a lot of different characters. That disadvantage will make it so that they're less likely to get attacked. So if you have Gale here with a measly little 14 AC, throw this on him. He'll be thankful that he has that there. So extremely useful in casters, anyone that wants to get disadvantage on attack rolls. And I'd have to say that this is another A tier pick, just being very useful for survivability's sake. So yeah. But next up we have the Derivation Cloak here. So when you poison a foe, you heal yourself for a 1d4. This also procs really strange because a lot of poisoning doesn't actually affect it. So a 1d4 of healing is not that great. You do have to use other pieces of gear to really get the biggest benefit from it. So poison a foe doesn't mean poison damage. It means actually applying the poison condition. And oddly enough, using a poison, if you have it in your inventory and coat your weapon with a basic poison, this won't actually apply the poison condition to the enemy the same way that it would trigger the cloak. So this doesn't actually apply it. However, if you have items like the Poisoner's Gloves, which will apply poison on a target when you deal poison damage, then it can work. And then that pairs well if you're going to use the Broodmother's Revenge. Whenever you get healed, you apply 1d6 of poison to your weapon, and then the Poison Gloves can apply the poison that way. So you do have to really kind of work around using this to get that 1d4 of healing. And I don't think that 1d4 healing is worth the setup of having to use those pieces of gear. So that I would have to say is a C tier option. It's just not as good as some of the rest that we have here. Like, for example, the next one with the Deathstalker Mantle. Now, the Deathstalker Mantle is exclusive to the Dark Urge. It's the only cloak that you can get in Act 1, and you do have to be the Dark Urge to get it. So a little bit of an asterisk there, but it's worth it. Once per turn, when you kill an enemy, you shroud yourself in primeval darkness to become invisible for 1 turn, or 2 turns. So when you turn invisible, incredible. The enemies have disadvantage on your attack rolls, you have advantage on yours, so it sets up well with a lot of other classes. Now, where it doesn't work is actually pretty plentiful. So let's say, for example, you have the Returning Pike or Nyrolna, and you throw the weapon, kill the target. Once it returns to your hand, it removes invisibility. So Womp Womp doesn't work with that. Also, if you have the Clouded Dagger spell, it doesn't count with that. And a lot of actual spells don't also trigger it. Clouded Dagger just being a very notable one. Another thing is, if you have the Illithid ability Cull the Weak, and Cull the Weak takes out the enemy, it's not you taking out the enemy, so you don't get the invisibility. So for Illithid playthroughs, which you likely will end up doing if you're the Dark Urge, doesn't work. So unfortunately, this doesn't proc off everything, but it's still good. So turning invisible for 2 turns is pretty crazy. This is S tier, and I would say it's the best cloak in the game. Just be mindful that there's a lot of instances where it won't actually trigger, and it only triggers once per turn. So yeah, if you explode a barrel, that doesn't count. If you attack someone out of combat and take them out in 1 shot, doesn't count. Just be mindful of when you're using it and you'll be fine, because it is, again, very powerful. But next up is the Wavemother's Cloak. Now, this is a little bit different than the reverse Raincloak here. So this gives us a condition, which is actually pretty good once we get into combat. So the Damp Aegis. During combat, once per turn, the cloak activates and gives the character water layer protection until the wearer takes damage. This gives a +2 to armor class and saving throws. It also prevents you from getting burned, and then it gives you resistance to fire damage. So this is basically like a way better version of the reverse Raincloak, because it doesn't actually give you the vulnerabilities as well. So yeah, this is good if you want to do heat gear. It also looks pretty cool with the Wavemother's robe, because it's the same material there. So yeah, style points for that. But the big thing is it's got the extra benefits. And I actually think that this actually should go probably D tier, because this one is pretty solid. So I actually might put that up in the A tier, +2 to AC and +2 to armor class, and or +2 AC, +2 saving throws, can't be burned, and resistance to fire damage is a lot from a cloak. So yeah, that's actually not a bad setup. Next up is the Mantle of the Holy Warrior. This is good because it gives you a spell that you can't get until like level 9 Paladin, and it gives you the Crusader's Mantle, which adds a 1d4 of radiant damage to your attacks for 10 turns. It does require concentration, but it's good on a Paladin because they don't typically hold a lot of concentrations unless it's hold person from a Vengeance Paladin. So that's great because it adds that extra radiant damage to your attacks, and I think everyone can benefit from it unless you're going against specific bosses that return radiant damage, and it can proc anything that's related to radiating orbs. So yeah, this is a pretty good cloak. Crusader Mantle just being a spell that's nice to have on any really character, but you can put this on a fighter that doesn't have a concentration, and it gives them a useful one to have. So with that, it's probably an A tier, high A tier to potential S tier choice, just because you can buff up your team so much with it, and that's a nice thing to have going for you. Next is the Nymph Cloak. Now this is a tough one because you can have Shadowheart in your party whenever you get it. You have to remove her to talk and get special inventory. This gives you Dominate Person, a level 5 spell. Same kind of logic here. Getting a level 5 spell is really nice to have. So with that, it's pretty effective. Another cool thing is this is actually a cloak that was in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. It's pretty good. Getting the Dominate Person as a spell is nice. Again, similar to the other spell. It's just a good one to have. So for those that don't have concentrations, might be not a bad item to have. Now finally we got the Shadeslayer Cloak. So what this does is it gives you an increased critical hit chance while you're hiding. So basically a +5 to your overall critical hit chance. It's increasing the critical hit chance by 1, which is basically 5%. And this effect can stack. Although the little caveat there, you do have to hide to be able to trigger that. So the skilled skullduggery here, you have to be hidden for it to actually work properly. Now, I don't know about you, but hiding is not something that's, you hide often in the game, but not often enough, and it's typically for other things other than going after attacks. So while it is a rare item, it's not as good as others, honestly. I think it's pretty decent overall. I might just put it in the B tier. If it was always active, that +1 to in critical hit chance would be massive because crit fishing builds are huge. But yeah, champion fighter typically would be a crit fishing build, and they have heavy armor, which doesn't always work well with hiding, but hey, it could also be a pretty decent one to have here. So yeah, I'd probably say somewhere maybe A tier to B tier. The increased critical hit chance is really great. Some people, it's just the hiding that really holds it back. But overall, the best cloaks in the game, in my opinion, would be the Deathstalker Mantle, giving you that free invisibility. That is super useful to have. In addition to that, the Cloak of Protection for that +1 armor class, very valuable to have. My favorite being the Cloak of the Cunning Brume. With this, you get the free fog cloud, and that can be kind of abused for things outside of combat as well. And then the Wavemother's Cloak is another really solid one. Now, this is something, again, when you disengage, this is mostly going to be used for stealing, but it also can be useful in combat if you disengage often. Doesn't proc on anything that disengages for you. It has to be an actual disengage action itself, not like the Drunken Master Monk. So yeah, pretty useful, but that is my thoughts on all the cloaks in Baldur's Gate 3. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. There are, again, a lot that have some issues, and that can cause the rankings to be a little bit different, but overall, I think cloaks are pretty decent, despite you not getting any in Act 1, except for the Deathstalker Mantle. It's pretty good. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Hit the subscribe button below if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next video.